Hey, Zach Brown here with Project Learn, and today we're going to be doing a little discussion on comparing and contrasting. So as you're taking the GED test, you may find that you have to compare and contrast things. Usually you'll see this with the language arts portion of the test, where you might be given two separate pieces of text, and you'll have to compare them and contrast them. In other words, you'll have to look for similarities and look for differences between them. So we do this all the time anytime we're presented with two different things, one way or another, right? So we're going to be looking at one tool specifically, although there's a number of ways that you can compare and contrast, and it's one that you should all be familiar with, although you might not know it by name. So we're going to be looking at the Venn diagram. Okay, so it's quite easy to construct a Venn diagram. We just need two overlapping circles. So for the sake of example, we're going to say that we're going to compare and contrast apples and bananas. So one circle will be apples, one circle will be bananas. The space in the middle that they overlap in will be what the elements share, right? So obviously an apple is red, it's fairly round, whereas a banana is yellow, it's long, etc., right? We can think of dozens of reasons that they are distinct from one another. And now let's compare them, right? So they're both fruit. They're both fairly cheap. They're easy to find, and so on. Okay, so the great thing about Venn diagrams is they're very easy to make, and they can help us organize our thoughts when we have to compare and contrast anything. And really, once you know how to make one, you can compare and contrast any two things, right? So the Bible and the Quran, coffee and coconut milk, R&B and country music, okay. So you might be thinking, well, those were relatively easy things to compare and contrast. They were similar enough that comparison wasn't much trouble, and yet they were each distinct enough that you didn't have trouble contrasting them either. So if you're wondering why this is a skill that I'm hammering on in the first place then, well, when you're taking the test, you might be confronted with, say, different texts, and it's not always going to be so obvious, the things that are similar or different. It might be the author's purpose, it might be the structure or the format of the text. It could be a number of things, right? So as we move more abstractly away from, say, apples and bananas and music, it can be a lot more challenging to sort of find similarities and differences when things seem just completely in different categories. So I'd like to take a step back from comparing and contrasting for just a moment and get you to think about, I want to say have a discussion, but since we're not in a classroom, we're going to have to use reflection here. So I'd like you to think for a moment about the role of tradition and ritual in societies. So every society has their own traditions and rituals. These are things that have a cultural significance that the people of that society engage in. It's a unifying thing, right? If everybody's doing the tradition, then it sort of develops a sense of group cohesion, a sense of community. Every culture has their own traditions. So if we went to, say, Tokyo, we might be interested to see how often bowing in certain social situations happens, which doesn't happen here. Or if we went to France, we might be interested in the bees, where they kiss each other on the cheek, right, pretty regularly, although I don't know what they're doing for coronavirus, probably taking a step back from that. And in our own society, we have a number of traditions as well. So for instance, Black Friday, that's a distinctly American thing, or even a baby shower, right, which is something that we think of a fairly regular thing. That's an American thing, and one of the interesting things about rituals is outsiders looking in might find them weird or bizarre or even unsettling. So the reason I bring that up and sort of want you to start thinking about ritual and its role in society is I've selected two short videos, and they both sort of depict two different rituals from different cultures in the world. And we're going to check these out, and as we're doing that, I'd like you to sort of have that compare and contrast muscle flexing in your mind while you're watching these. So when we come back, we'll dissect it a little further. So I have the links down below, and if that doesn't work, I've written them down so you can. Okay, pretty interesting, right? So I mentioned right before that sometimes when an outsider looks into another culture's rituals or traditions, it can seem a little bizarre, and that may have been the case for you with either or both of these. I also ask that you look at these through a compare and contrast lens. And if you did, you may find that it was easier to contrast these and find the differences, and some of you might be getting hung up on some of the similarities. If this were a standard classroom environment, I think this would be a great opportunity to have what would probably be a pretty cool discussion on what some of those similarities were. But since we don't have that opportunity, we're just going to have to take a few moments to ourselves. So I think this is a cool opportunity for an extended response in your own words to what these similarities might be. Now, those of you that were getting hung up on that, just a few clues to get you going. Consider how the passage of time played a role. Or in other words, consider the transition between one stage of life to another that we saw in these two examples. Another might be to consider the role of the participant. And I guess my final clue, consider not just the participant, but the experience for the broader community of the people involved. Okay, so once you've thought this through, and you may have used a Venn diagram to help organize your thoughts, I think an extended response would be best suited to this kind of response. So we're going to be using the traditional essay format here. We want at least 5 paragraphs. We're going to use the first paragraph as our introduction, where we're introducing our topic. We have at least 3 supporting paragraphs, where each supporting paragraph we're selecting one point we want to make and using the paragraph to elaborate on it and justify it or make your case for it or what have you. And then finally you want to conclude it. You want to wrap everything up nice and cohesive. So I think this has a lot of potential to actually be a pretty interesting extended response from you guys. Now, if you're still getting hung up maybe on organizing your thoughts or the formatting or how to move your essay forward a little bit, one thing you can do is you can do a Google search for sample extended responses, or you can even get a little more specific, sample extended responses comparing ideas. And read a few of those. That might help you get more acquainted with the structure. So as I always say in classroom with the language arts portion, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to just read more, get more familiar with the written word and how things are structured and that sort of thing. So reading some of these extended responses will certainly help you out. Anyway, take care. Best of luck.